And then in a separate video, I'll talk about osmolarity and tonicity and that last kind of example that we were prepping for in class. So in homeostasis, what we're considering is it's a homeostatic mechanism where we're trying to maintain the same kind of condition, and hence its definition or the origin of its term. In slide 6, what we see here is that there's an issue of trying to maintain our around a certain set point. So the y-axis here is referring to something like body temperature, heart rate, glucose levels, etc. And then we're trying to sort of keep around that certain set point. And so the blue line is trying to indicate that over time we may heat up or cool down, but we're trying to keep our temperature the same amount. Same idea with heart rate or other types of issues. If we lose this homeostasis, we can deviate away from the set point, and that's an onset of a lot of pathologies. In the case of negative feedback, we're going to compare that to positive feedback, and then we're going to kind of give you some examples of different types of feedbacks that and another form of classification. So positive and negative feedback. Negative feedback is telling you you want to kind of get rid of the stimulus that initially triggered your response. So here, rising body temperature gets detected by thermoreceptors, which go to a control center, which act through effectors here, the sweat glands, to reduce the amount of the stimulus that originally you had. And so the negative part is talking about you're getting rid of what caused this whole feedback loop to begin anyway. We'll learn in this class that there's lots of different types of reflexes, cardiac reflexes, etc., that help to be able to maintain homeostasis around the set point. And so we have a lot of these kinds of receptors and effectors at play here. And it's a theme that we'll see over and over again. So negative feedback is that. What about positive feedback? Positive feedbacks are more rare mechanisms, but they're important in terms of mediating an explosive type of response. And there's examples here of uterine contractions and orgasms. But blood clotting here is the one that is easiest to visualize. And in this case, what you have is a clot, and the formation of a clot is your stimulus. And so your positive feedback is creating more clot. And so a break in the blood vessel wall, for example, causes the release of chemicals, initiates clotting, and then this accelerates. And so your clot will grow explosively. You don't want this to take over, though. So a lot of these positive feedback mechanisms have some kind of an extrinsic regulation on top of them to help them from getting out of control. But they're very useful for this kind of response. So that's an example of a positive feedback where we've increased the stimulus that initiated the whole pathway. So another way of looking at this is thinking about autoregulation and extrinsic regulation. So positive and negative feedback loops can work within a tissue or within a cell in autoregulation, and they can also, positive and feedback loops can work outside of a system, where one system imposes itself on another. So in the case of autoregulation, what you have are characteristics where the cell, tissue, or organ adjusts automatically in response to some kind of environmental change. So vasodilation is a key example of that, and it happens in several different systems. Kidney is a great example where you maintain the same amount of renal blood flow even if your blood pressure drops a lot. And so if your blood pressure drops a lot, you still want to keep your blood pressure to your kidneys relatively high so that you can help maintain filtration and getting rid of metabolic waste. And so you open up or vasodilate to permit the fluid to be able to get into the glomerulus to allow filtration to occur. So that's one example of a kind of autoregulation that can happen. The heart itself has a form of autoregulation where if it gets stretched by getting swollen full of blood, it will actually contract more forcefully, and that will help keep blood moving. And it's a characteristic of the tissue itself. Extrinsic regulation is when the nervous system or some other system imposes itself onto another system. And so a great example of that is when we have the nervous system causing short-term changes like increasing your heart rate. And in that case, you have the autonomic nervous system either elevating or decreasing your heart rate accordingly. And we'll talk about those types of examples. The endocrine system is another kind of example of it. And so we have these multiple factors that can affect homeostasis and that can kind of push on our bodies, and we need to try to maintain that set point. And so we have environmental stressors, genetic stressors, metabolic stress that can all end up challenging it. And we can either adapt through these reflexes or through behaviors that we have that we'll learn about in this class, or we may become vulnerable to different types of pathologies that can arise if we move away from a set point. So that helps to kind of capture some of that homeostasis story. So with that, I'm going to close the homeostatic part, and you can click on to get the next video for osmolarity.